social media. But, of course, there's a history here. Last year, February 2016, the Pope said, "A person who only thinks about building walls wherever they may be and not building bridges is not Christian." That was a direct reference to candidate Trump. And Trump replied at the time, "Disgraceful." Now today, the president meets the Pope, and the Pope handed him as a gift his encyclical on climate change. This is a document, understand, that was produced by radical globalists who are anti-freedom, anti-capitalism, anti-energy use. Now, the president, if he had responded in kind, he would have handed the Pope back the 95 Theses of Martin Luther, which started the Protestant Reformation. But he was a little bit more polite. He gave him 5 volumes of Martin Luther King, a civil rights leader, obviously, and he said, "I will be reading the encyclical. I'll be reading it." Well, don't bother. And you don't have to bother either, because I'm going to explain to you the radicals who wrote this encyclical for the Pope and the agenda that they have behind it. But first of all, again, getting back to this whole issue, it's not the president's prerogative, or it's not his authority, his responsibility to lecture the Pope on religion. And it's not the Pope's responsibility to lecture the president on politics, on economics, on science. When he puts out the encyclical, you understand that what this literally means is a letter that is circulated around the church. It doesn't have the authority of a papal pronouncement from the chair, which they call ex cathedra. It is simply his opinion. But there is a connection, really, back to the Protestant Reformation. If you remember what was the cause of it, some of the political and economic reasons behind the Reformation was that the Catholic Church was putting out indulgences which required people to pay the church to get permission to sin. And a lot of that involved staying open on holidays, on holy days, which were multiplying beyond belief. And so the rising merchant class, the people who had small businesses, had to essentially pay a tax to them to stay open. Today, the indulgence is a carbon tax that is being sold by the globalists. People like Al Gore, the UN that you'll pay the carbon tax to, or the bankers, or perhaps the Pope will get a kickback on this. This is the indulgence that is behind this radical agenda. But let's take a look first at some of the people behind this. There's a report from Climate Depot last year talking about the unholy alliance of the people who were advising the Pope back in 2015 when he put out this encyclical. And this is the way Mark Morano described it. He said, "The Vatican advisors can only be described as a brew of anti-capitalist, pro-population control advocates who allow no dissent and are way out of the mainstream, even of the global warming establishment." As he goes through these people, he talks about how even the people who are pushing man-made climate change believe that these advisors that the Pope has picked are way out on a limb and have absolutely no credibility. So let's take a look at a few of them. There's Jeffrey Sachs, for example. Jeffrey Sachs is a hardcore socialist. At a 2007 international lecture, he claimed, quote, "We are bursting at the seams." He said the focus of his overpopulation mantra was primarily the continent of Africa. If only those poor African countries, he said, would just lower their fertility rate, the world and Africa would thrive economically. So he is a zero population growth, actually a depopulationist, just like Paul Ehrlich and others. At a 2009 Conference of European Socialists, he said that the socialists were the heirs and leaders of the most successful economic and political system in the world. He said that they would be the ones who would provide environmental sustainability and fiscal redistribution, and those were the successful elements in managing a just society. In marked contrast, he said, to the U.S., where taxes are too low. He's advocated, of course, a carbon tax as a good socialist. He likes taxes, especially the ones that redistribute wealth from the poor and from the middle class to the rich. Understand that when they're saying they're doing this for the poor, the people who are going to be hardest hit by this are going to be the people at the bottom rung of the economic ladder. People like the ones in Africa, where Barack Obama went and said, "You're not going to have any air conditioning." You couldn't have air conditioning here. If we did, the planet would blow up. See, people like Obama get their large entourages, their private jets, but not for the poor. You have to understand that it's not only our quality of life that derives from energy, cheap, affordable energy, but it's also our life expectancy is tied to that. But I want to focus here. We're going to skip a lot of these advisors because I want to get to the agenda. And there's one advisor, Hans Schellenhuber, a German. He's been an advisory board of the Deutsche Bank as well as the German government, but he also has a lot of connections to the British government. to Prince Charles, especially Queen Elizabeth. He's been given the Commander of the Order of the British Empire, CBE. He was part of the Climate Gate debacle at East Anglia Climate Research. And when all of that broke, the way that he defended that was to appeal to his authority, to his awards. He organized a bunch of Nobel Prize holders to shut down this controversy. And this is what he said, because he's speaking, pontificating from this position of authority because he is a Nobel Prize winner, just like these other people. At the time, he said, when one has become a Nobel Prize winner, one is permitted to speak about moral standards, for then, when one has been knighted, so to speak, one is raised above any doubt. That is the basis of man-made climate change that they tell us. They're not basing it on science. There's nothing here that they can measure. Even if they had produced some near-term results, every time they make a prediction, it gets proven wrong. But if they had something that could be, they had a model, they couldn't test it because they're talking about things that are happening decades or centuries in advance. Nevertheless, he's come up with a mantra that if we have 2 degrees change, the entire world will melt down. If we don't get down to 1 billion people, Schellenhuber tells us, then we are going to have a collapse of the Earth. Schellenhuber created the Earth League with Prince Charles. Seriously, that's what they called it. Of course, he has also coordinated in 2009 the Copenhagen Climate Change Conference with Prince Charles. That was an abject failure. They went on to help plan the Paris Climate Conference, which just happened this last December. He also was part of the Club of Rome and the Vatican Academy of Science. But I want to go back to this Earth League and their Earth Constitution that they put out there, because this shows their world government and where they want to go. As I point out, he's known for his advocacy of world government. He has proposed a global democratic society that he would organize within the framework of the United Nations. He would like to have a global democracy organized around 3 core activities. Number 1, an Earth Constitution. Number 2, a global council. Number 3, a planetary court. Now, the Earth Constitution would transcend the UN Charter and, of course, our Constitution and everything else. The Global Council would be an assembly of individuals elected directly by all the people on the Earth who will then decide they're going to take whatever they want from you. And the Planetary Court would be a transnational legal body that would focus on violations of the Earth Constitution. He said in 1988, in a study he wrote called Geocybernetics, he said countries should relinquish a good deal of national sovereignty in favor of, quote, powerful supranational institutions. The borders of our nation states have become irrelevant, he said. They're trampling on our human rights and our natural rights, and that can only be overcome by giving up a good deal of national sovereignty and establishing a true regime of global governance. No question about where this guy is. This is the guy, one of the 4 who created this encyclical and one of the key advisors to the Pope. This is what's behind this. This is why Donald Trump doesn't need to read it. You don't need to read it. This is what's behind it. And, of course, when we look at publications like The Guardian, as this came out, they said they criticized the Pope because he didn't talk about population control. Well, he didn't talk about that because that is diametrically opposed to everything that the Catholic Church is about. But you have to understand that this isn't just junk science. This isn't just feudalism to a global governance that is disguised as socialism and world democracy. This is also a pagan religion, Gaia, or pantheism. When they talk about this, they talk about Gaia as being this organism that is alive and actually responding to humans. They see you as a virus. See, it all ties together. The overpopulation, you're the virus that is killing the earth. And they quite literally believe that it is responding and cognizant. That's the words that Schellenhuber used, that the earth is cognizant of us and it is doing things to get rid of us. But of course, they're going to help it along with their global governance. That's what's behind this encyclical. That's why Trump and you don't need to pay any attention to it except to understand what it is and to speak against it and understand that it is in opposition to everything the Roman Catholic Church has ever supported.